The rain hit the tent like it had a personal grudge. Eli Marsh had been lying on his back for 40 minutes, staring at the ceiling of his two-man tent while water hammered the nylon overhead and lightning turned everything white for half a second at a time. The other 5 people in their camping group were presumably asleep in their own tents, or at least pretending to be. He'd been doing the pretending thing for 3 weeks now. He was getting pretty good at it. He was not good at sleeping. His phone said 11:04 p.m. Outside, the storm had escalated from inconvenient to genuinely hostile. One of the tent stakes had started making a sound he didn't love, a slow, rhythmic pulling noise, like the earth reconsidering its commitment to holding things in place. He was considering getting up to check it when someone knocked on his tent. Not on the door. On the side panel, 3 flat-palmed slaps, like someone who had strong feelings about canvas. "Eli." A pause. "Eli, I know you're awake." He closed his eyes. He recognized the voice. Of course he recognized the voice. He'd spent the last 2 days actively not thinking about that voice. Wren Calloway, Marcus's little sister, 26 years old, event coordinator, entirely too perceptive for anyone's peace of mind, including apparently his own. "I'm asleep," he said. "You answered me." "I talk in my sleep." A beat of silence, filled in entirely by rain. Then Eli. "My tent collapsed." He sat up. The zipper of his tent door stuck twice before he got it open, which felt appropriate. And then Wren Calloway was standing outside in the rain with a headlamp strapped to her forehead, a duffel bag over one shoulder, and an expression on her face that was doing a remarkable job of appearing calm while her hair was completely plastered to her face. "Hi," she said. "Your tent collapsed." He said. "I just said that." He looked past her. 30 feet away. What had previously been a 3-person tent she'd been sharing with no one because Priya and Jess had decided to share, and the math had worked out exactly wrong, was now a flat, wet pancake of nylon clinging to the muddy ground. One of the poles had snapped clean. The rain was already pooling inside it. He looked back at her. She looked at him. The headlamp was pointed directly at his face and he was pretty sure she could see every thought he was having. "You need to come in," he said. "I know. I'm not. I was being polite. I wasn't asking." "I know that too." She didn't move. "Are you going to unzip the rest of the door? Or are we doing this part where you stand there looking complicated for another 30 seconds first?" He unzipped the door. She climbed in without ceremony. Duffel bag first, then herself, and he zipped it shut behind her and turned around to find her already sitting cross-legged on the far side of his sleeping pad, headlamp still on, excavating a dry shirt from inside the duffel with the focused energy of someone who decided not to be embarrassed and was executing that decision at speed. He sat on his side. His sleeping bag was bunched up at the foot of the pad. "The other side of the tent is yours," he said. "Obviously." "Obviously," she agreed, not looking up. "I'll stay on this side." "I assumed." He reached over and turned off his lantern, because it felt like the right thing to do, and then immediately regretted it because now the only light was her headlamp, which was pointed at the tent ceiling and casting everything in a dim, amber-edged glow that was doing absolutely nothing helpful for the situation. "You can turn your headlamp off," he said. "If you want." "I know." She was quiet for a second. "I'll turn it off when I'm done." "Done with what?" "Figuring out where to put everything." He watched her, against his better judgment, as she methodically arranged the contents of her duffel bag, dry clothes on the left, toiletry bag at the top corner, a paperback that had somehow survived mostly dry in a Ziploc bag, a granola bar that she put directly in her jacket pocket with the particular decisiveness of someone who was not sharing it. "Do you always do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Organize everything before you sleep." She glanced over at him. The headlamp caught the edge of her face. She'd changed into the dry shirt, something heathered gray with a university logo half faded from washing. And her hair was still wet, but she'd done something to it with her hands that made it look less drowned and more intentional. "Yes," she said. "It means I know exactly where things are if I need them. In the middle of the night. Especially in the middle of the night." She reached up and clicked the headlamp off. The dark settled in around them, soft and rain-muffled. "You're a light sleeper," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah. Marcus told me." He didn't say anything to that. Marcus told her things. That was a sentence he was choosing not to examine too closely tonight. Outside, the rain had shifted into something steadier and less dramatic, still heavy, but more committed, less performative. The tent held. The stake was still making its sound, but it had settled into something that felt more stable, less imminent. They lay down at the same time, which happened by accident, and then was immediately awkward because of it. He was on his back. She was on her side, facing away from him. The sleeping pad was generously sized for one person and reasonably sized for two people who were both committed to maintaining maximum physical distance, which they were, emphatically. "Sorry about your tent," he said. "It's a cheap tent. I borrowed it from my cousin." A pause. "I've been meaning to buy a real one." "For how long?" 3 years. He almost laughed. He stopped it before it got out. "What's been stopping you?" "The same thing that stops me from doing a lot of things." She said it lightly, like it wasn't anything. "I keep waiting until I'm sure I'll use it enough to justify the purchase." "You're camping right now." "I know. I thought about buying one before this trip. And I borrowed my cousin's instead." A pause. It collapsed. This time he did laugh, a short, quiet thing. More exhale than sound. She didn't say anything, but he heard something shift in her breathing, like she'd been waiting for it. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'm trying." "You're talking. You're also talking." "Good night, Wren." "Good night, Eli." The rain kept on. He stared at the tent ceiling in the dark and listened to her breathing slow. And sometime around 12:30 a.m., it evened out completely into the particular quiet rhythm of someone actually asleep. He lay there for another hour, not sleeping, being very careful not to think about anything in particular. His phone buzzed at 1:17 a.m. with a text from Marcus. "Hey, is Wren with you?" Her tent caved. "She's not responding." He typed back times, "She's here. She's asleep. Tent's dead." Marcus replied almost immediately, which meant he'd also been awake times good. "Hey, you doing okay?" Eli looked at the message for a long time. Outside, the rain was finally starting to ease. "Yeah," he typed, "I'm good." He put the phone face down on the ground beside him. In the dark, Wren shifted in her sleep, pulling the edge of the sleeping bag toward her by a few inches without waking up. He didn't move it back. He stared at the ceiling for another 40 minutes before his eyes finally closed. When his phone buzzed again at 1:43 a.m., he was almost asleep. He didn't pick it up. He saw the notification banner in the dark, though, another message from Marcus. Just 3 words that he was too tired to make sense of before he went under. "She knows. Man." He woke up at 6:12 a.m. to an empty tent and the smell of coffee. Wren's half of the sleeping pad was neatly straightened. She'd smoothed the surface flat with her hands before she left, which he noticed because his half looked like a topographical disaster zone by comparison. Her duffel bag was gone. The granola bar wrapper was in the small mesh pocket by the door, folded in half. Because of course it was. He lay there for a minute longer than he needed to, looking at the smooth side of the sleeping pad, before he got up. The campsite had been rearranged overnight. The rain had knocked over the folding table, scattered the camp chairs, and deposited a respectable quantity of leaves and pine needles into the cooking area. But Marcus and Dev had apparently gotten up before everyone else and dealt with the worst of it. Marcus was now crouched by the fire pit, coaxing something back to life from the coals. Dev was eating cereal directly from the box, leaning against the cooler with the particular satisfaction of a man who'd made very few decisions this morning and felt good about all of them. Wren was at the camp stove. She was making coffee. 2 cups. The French press they'd brought was a camp-sized 4-cup, and she'd already pressed it and was pouring the first cup now. And she turned around when she heard him and held it out. 2 sugars. No milk, she said. Marcus told me. He took it. Their fingers didn't touch. He was aware of the fact that their fingers didn't touch in the same way you're aware of missing a step on a staircase. You didn't have to, he said. I know. She turned back to pour her own cup. I was already making it. He stood there with the coffee and watched her put exactly 1 sugar in her own cup and stir it with a camping spoon she then rinsed and dried on her shorts. Across the fire pit, Marcus looked up, looked at the 2 of them, and looked back down at the fire with the carefully neutral expression of someone who was having a lot of thoughts and choosing not to share a single one of them. The morning moved the way mornings move at campsites, slowly, with coffee, punctuated by the sound of Priya and Jess eventually emerging from their tent and declaring they wanted to hike the waterfall trail before lunch. Dev wanted to fish. Marcus had a strong opinion about the fish in this particular lake that he shared at considerable length, and the opinion was that they were smart and they were lazy and they were winning. Eli volunteered for the waterfall trail. He told himself it was because he needed to move, and that was true. He told himself it had nothing to do with the fact that Wren said waterfall trail sounds good 3 seconds before he did, and that was less true, and he was aware of the gap. The trail was 4 miles round trip and climbed about 800 feet in the first 2 miles, which meant it was the kind of trail that sorted itself out early. Priya and Jess set a comfortable pace and chatted ahead, and Marcus took the back. And Eli and Wren ended up in the middle at the same pace through what felt like coincidence and probably wasn't. She didn't make conversation. He appreciated that. A lot of people felt the need to fill trail silence, and he'd never understood it. Silence on a trail was a feature, not a flaw. Wren walked with her hands in her jacket pockets and looked at the canopy and occasionally stopped to look at something on the ground, a mushroom formation, a pattern of bark, a particularly insistent fern, and then caught up without explanation. At the 2-mile mark there was a wooden bridge over a creek where the trail widened, and they both stopped to look at the water the same way they'd lain down last night at the same time, by accident. And then they were standing side by side with their forearms on the railing and the creek moving fast and cold below them from last night's rain. Eli looked at the water. In his peripheral vision, Wren was also looking at the water. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Eventually." "Me too." Pause. "Sorry if I took up too much space." "You didn't." "I tend to." She said it without self-consciousness. "Marcus says I'm a chaotic sleeper. I thrash." "You didn't thrash." She looked over at him. He kept looking at the water. He could feel her looking at him the way you can feel the sun shift. "Okay," she said, and looked back at the creek. Below them, the water was doing something complicated around a half-submerged log, splitting and then rejoining, rushing and then slowing, finding its way around the obstacle without drama. Just direction. Eli watched it for longer than he meant to. "I'm going to do something embarrassing if you keep making that face," Wren said. "What face?" "The one where you're thinking really hard about something and pretending you're not thinking about anything." He looked at her. She was still looking at the creek. One corner of her mouth curved up in a way that was doing things it had no business doing. Her hair was dry today and she'd pulled it back into something loose at the base of her neck. And there was a single piece that had escaped near her temple and was moving in the slight wind off the water. "I don't make that face," he said. "You absolutely make that face. Marcus makes the same one. It's a whole thing." "I'm not." "Eli." She turned to look at him fully, her forearms still on the railing, her eyes level with his in a way that made him feel briefly and inexplicably like he'd been caught. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black in the shadow of the canopy, and steady in a way that reminded him of someone who was very used to having conversations that other people found uncomfortable. "It's fine," she said. "You don't have to explain it." He didn't explain it. They stayed at the bridge for another 2 minutes before Marcus's voice floated back from up the trail. "Times. Are you two coming or what times?" And they pushed off the railing at the same time and kept walking. Lunch was sandwiches at a picnic table near the lake. Wren sat across from him and spent most of the meal arbitrating a disagreement between Priya and Dev about whether the fish Marcus had caught that morning was big enough to keep, which it was not. And Marcus knew it. And Marcus was pretending not to know it with admirable conviction. Wren settled it by pointing out that they had enough food and the fish looked like it had places to be, and Dev let it go. And the fish went back in the lake. And Marcus gave Wren a look that she received without blinking. In the afternoon they split up. Priya and Jess found a sunny rock and declared it theirs for the next 2 hours. Dev took his fishing gear to a different part of the lake. And Marcus fell asleep in a camp chair with a hat over his face inside of 20 minutes. Eli was rewiring a loose connection on the camp stove, an old habit. He noticed broken things and his hands fixed them before his brain made the decision when Wren sat down across from him at the folding table with a topographic map she'd been studying for the last 20 minutes. "There's a longer trail on the north side," she said. 6 miles. "It's supposed to have better views than the waterfall trail." "I know. I looked at it this morning." She looked up, and it'd take most of the afternoon. "We have most of the afternoon." He reconnected the fuel line and checked it. "We'd have to go now to get back before dark." "I know." She turned the map around and pushed it across the table so it was oriented toward him. She'd marked the trail in pencil lightly, so it could be erased with the elevation gain annotated at 3 points in her handwriting, which was small and extremely legible. The handwriting of someone who was used to making information accessible to other people. He looked at the map. He looked at her. "Marcus is asleep," he said. "Marcus is always asleep by 2 p.m. when we camp. He's been doing it since he was 17. She said it with the precise fondness of someone who'd logged years of observation. "He doesn't need us." Eli folded the map back along her crease lines and picked up his water bottle. "Okay," he said. They signed the trail register at the north trailhead and started up. The north trail was steeper and less traveled. The path was narrower. The routes more frequent. The canopy thicker. They didn't talk much in the first mile because the incline demanded attention. At the second mile there was a false summit that gave onto a partial view of the valley and they stopped there. And Eli took a picture of the ridge line that he wouldn't post anywhere because he didn't post things. And Wren stood at the edge of the overlook with her hands in her pockets and looked at the distance with a quality of stillness that made him think she did this often, stood at the edges of things and just looked. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You can try. What did you do before event coordinating?" She turned to look at him, mildly surprised. "Teaching. Middle school. English." She paused. "For 4 years." "You quit." "I left." She said it carefully, like the word mattered. "There's a difference. I didn't quit because it was hard. I left because I'd stayed longer than I should have." "Why did you stay?" She looked back at the valley. "Because I was good at it. And I thought being good at something was the same as being right for it." A pause. "It's not." He thought about that. Below them, the valley was doing what valleys do in late afternoon, filling with shadow from the bottom up, the light holding longest on the ridgelines. "What made you leave when you did?" he asked. "A kid." She said it without sentimentality. 8th grade girl. Very smart. Kind of a nightmare. Reminded me of myself. She wrote an essay about what she wanted to do when she grew up and she listed 12 things, 12 actual specific things. Not be happy or whatever, and I read it and I thought, when did I stop having a list times? She looked at her hands. That, I didn't have an answer. So I gave myself a month to figure it out. And at the end of the month I still didn't have an answer. So I handed in my notice. And event coordinating. Paid the bills while I figured out the list. She smiled. A small, private thing. It turns out I'm also good at event coordinating. And I think I might actually be right for it. Which is different. She looked over at him. "What about you? How long have you been with the same electrical company?" The question landed somewhere between his ribs and his stomach. He kept his face level. 6 years. He said, "Do you like it?" "I'm good at it." She looked at him for a moment. He watched something move behind her eyes, not pity, which he would have hated, but recognition, the particular recognition of someone who had recently learned to hear the difference between those two sentences. "That's not what I asked," she said, gently. He looked at the valley. "Yeah," he said. "I know." She didn't push. That was the thing about her. She'd hand you a door and then step back. And whether you walked through it or not was entirely up to you. And she'd be fine either way. It was one of the more unsettling things about her. They started back down before he had to figure out what to say next. The last half-mile back they walked closer together than they had on the way up, close enough that their arms brushed twice on the narrow parts of the path. He didn't move away. Neither did she. Back at camp, Marcus was awake and had started dinner pasta with a sauce from a jar that he was doctoring with spices he'd brought from home in a dedicated little tin. Because Marcus had priorities. "How was the North Trail?" he asked, not looking up from the pot. "Good," Eli said. "Views?" "Good." Marcus looked up at Wren. She gave him a look back. He nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they've received confirmation of a theory they've been running for a long time. Eli sat down and checked his phone. The notification from last night was still there, Marcus's text. "She knows." Man. He'd meant to ask Marcus what that meant. He'd been not asking all day. He looked across the camp at Wren, who was helping Jess lay the table. She caught him looking and held it for a second before she turned back to what she was doing. The second stretched out longer than it had any reason to. He put his phone away, in the pocket of his jacket, alongside the phone. It was a different notification. He hadn't opened a voicemail from a number he recognized as HR at the firm where he'd worked for 6 years. He'd been not opening it for 4 days. He'd gotten pretty good at that too. The fire that night was better than the night before. Dev turned out to be the fire builder in the group, the kind of person who took the geometry of it seriously, who thought about airflow and fuel ratio and the relationship between the two in a way that Eli respected enormously because he thought about things the same way, just about different things. By 9 o'clock the fire was a proper thing, steady and orange. And they'd pulled the camp chairs into a loose circle around it, and Priya had produced a bottle of bourbon from somewhere that no one had expected. They were telling embarrassing stories. This was the inevitable trajectory of any camping trip that reached its second night intact. Someone started telling an embarrassing story, and then everyone had to tell one or the social contract collapsed. Marcus's story involved a conference call, a cut, and a series of escalating audio issues that Eli had heard twice before and was somehow still funny. Priya told one about a bridesmaid speech she'd given where she'd accidentally read from her notes app instead of the speech, and her notes had been her grocery list. Dev told one that turned out to be less embarrassing and more genuinely harrowing, involving a kayak, a wrong turn, and 3 hours lost on a lake in Minnesota. And at the end of it they were all quiet for a second, with the particular reverence that near-miss stories deserve. Jess started in on one about a job interview, and Eli stood up and said he was going to get more firewood from the stack by the tree line. Which was true. And he walked away from the fire into the dark. He stood at the tree line for a minute longer than necessary. The firewood was right there. He picked up 2 logs and didn't move back yet. From the fire, Jess's voice. Then Marcus's laugh, the real one. The one that sounded like a slightly alarmed dog. The one he'd known for 11 years. Dev saying something low. Priya responding. A pause. Then footsteps on the packed dirt behind him. "You don't have a story," Wren said. She stopped a few feet to his left, where the tree line curved and there was a narrow view of the lake between the pines, just a silver slice of it in the moonlight. Moving slightly. "Everyone has a story," he said. "Sure. You just don't want to tell yours." He looked at the lake. What gave it away? The firewood excuse was pretty thin. I actually needed firewood. You grabbed 2 logs. The fire has enough for an hour. She sat down on a flat rock at the edge of the tree line, settling in with the ease of someone who'd decided she was staying. You can go back if you want. I'm not keeping you. He looked at the fire. Visible through the trees, the circle of chairs. The bourbon making another round. Marcus leaning forward to say something that made Priya laugh. He looked at the silver lake. He sat down on the ground next to the rock. Not beside her exactly. More at a right angle to it. His back against a pine. His knees up. The forest here was quiet in the particular way. Forests are quiet after a storm, everything a little exhausted. A little relieved. What's your story, he said. The embarrassing one. I told it. The one about the elevator pitch. You told it fast. It was embarrassing fast. Wren. She looked at him. In the firelight filtering through the pines, her face was half lit and half shadow, the line running straight down the center, dark on one side and warm on the other. Her eyes were steady, the way they always were. But there was something else in them now, something she was weighing. Okay, she said. Real one. She looked at the lake. 3 years ago, I had a job offer in Portland. Good one, director of programming at a small arts organization. Exactly the kind of thing I'd been working toward. I'd done 3 rounds of interviews. I was the final candidate. She paused, and I turned it down. Why? Because I was scared I'd be bad at it. She said it cleanly, without apology. Not that I'd fail, I knew I wouldn't fail. I'd have been fine. But I was scared I'd be mediocre at the thing I'd spent years working toward. And mediocre felt worse than not trying. A beat. That's the embarrassing part. Not that I turned it down. That I turned it down for that reason. He didn't say anything for a moment. The fire crackled behind them, low and consistent. Did you regret it, he asked. For about a year. She turned a small stick over in her fingers. End to end. Then I got the event coordinating contract and started doing work I actually liked. And I stopped thinking about Portland. She looked at him. Why did I tell you that? I didn't make you. No. But you asked in the way that makes it hard not to answer. She tilted her head slightly. You do that. You ask things and then you wait, and you don't fill in the silence. And it's very hard to resist filling in the silence yourself. Sorry. Don't be. It's a good quality. She looked back at the lake. The silver strip of water was still there between the pines. What are you not telling anyone? The question came out quiet. Not a trap, more like someone holding out a hand in the dark. Palm up. No pressure. He looked at his hands. They were good hands. He'd always thought capable hands. Hands that knew how to fix things. They hadn't been fixing much lately. 3 weeks of them sitting in his lap, or holding his phone, or wrapped around coffee cups he didn't taste. I got laid off, he said. 3 weeks ago. The fire crackled. A log shifted. I know, Wren said. He looked at her. Marcus told me, she said. Not on purpose, he let it slip 2 weeks ago and then tried to walk it back. But I'd already heard it. She met his eyes. Level and calm. I wasn't going to bring it up unless you did. Why not? Because it wasn't mine to bring up. She held his gaze. It's yours. He looked back at the fire, visible through the dark between the trees. Marcus was saying something now that had Jess and Priya leaning forward, hands moving, voice animated. Some story or argument that required the full use of his body. Eli had known Marcus since they were 15 years old. He'd told Marcus he was fine. He'd texted it, typed it, said it out loud. And Marcus had heard it and believed it because Eli had been saying he was fine since they were teenagers, and he'd always made it true eventually. I haven't told anyone, he said, that I'm not fine. Wren nodded. She didn't say times it's okay, times, or times you should have said something, times, or any of the other things people say to fill space. She just nodded. And the nod meant times I hear you. And that was enough. 6 years, he said. I was good at it. I know. I thought I was going to make senior electrician this year. They've been talking about it. He paused. Turned out they were talking about a lot of things they weren't going to do. What did they say when they let you go? Restructuring. He said it flatly. The word they use when they want it to sound like it has nothing to do with you, but it felt like it had something to do with you. He was quiet for a long time. The fire behind them had settled into something lower and steadier. The bourbon circle, quiet now. Voices, soft. Yeah, he said finally. Wren didn't say anything. She sat on her rock with her arms around her knees and let the quiet be what it was. And he found that he could sit in it without the usual pressure to fill it or fix it or escape it. It was the first time in 3 weeks he'd felt that. After a while she said, "What do you actually want to do?" He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "With the next thing. What do you actually want?" She wasn't being rhetorical. She was asking the way she asked things, hand out. Palm up. No particular agenda about what he'd put in it. He opened his mouth and then closed it. He hadn't let himself ask that question. He'd been too busy not asking it. Same as he was too busy not calling HR back. Too busy not telling Marcus. Too busy maintaining the surface of times I'm fine times so no one would look underneath and find the honest answer. Which was that he didn't know. And not knowing felt like a verdict he hadn't agreed to accept yet. "I don't know," he said. And then, because she'd been honest with him, "That's the part that scares me." Wren nodded. "That's the part that means you haven't decided yet," she said, "which is different from not knowing." He looked at her. She was looking at the lake again, her chin on her knees, and he thought he'd never seen anyone sit as comfortably in a hard conversation as she did. Not like it was easy. Like it was worth it. They sat there until the fire behind them quieted to a murmur of voices and the lake went still. And then Wren stood up and brushed pine needles off her jeans and picked up the 2 logs he'd brought from the stack. "I'll take these in," she said. "You don't have to." "I know." She started back toward the fire, then stopped. She didn't turn around. "Eli." "Yeah." A beat. Her voice was even. "Marcus didn't ask me to watch over you. I told him that was why I came this weekend." That was a lie. She paused. "I came because I wanted to." She walked back to the fire before he could say anything. He sat at the tree line for a while longer, back against the pine, looking at the slice of lake between the trees. Above him, the canopy had thinned enough to show stars, not many, just a few. But they were there. He pulled out his phone. He opened the voicemail from HR. He didn't listen to it yet. He just held the phone in his hands and looked at the notification, and for the first time in 3 weeks it felt like something he might be able to do. Not tonight, but maybe. The second night in the tent was different in the way that a room is different after you've rearranged the furniture, same space, same dimensions. But the air moves differently, and you keep reaching for things that aren't where they used to be. Wren came in at 1130, which was later than the night before. He heard her at the zip while he was still awake. He was always still awake, and he sat up and turned on the small lantern. This time, because it seemed more honest than lying there in the dark pretending to be asleep. She came in and zipped the door behind her. And when she turned and saw the light, she looked at it for a second, and then at him. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She sat down on her side and started the process of unwinding jacket off, boots off. The loose, systematic settling in she'd done the night before. But slower tonight. Like she wasn't in a rush to get to the part where she stopped moving. "Marcus asked me what we talked about at the tree line," she said. "What did you say?" "Nothing worth reporting." She folded her jacket. He made a face. "What kind of face?" "The one where he knows more than he's saying and he wants you to know that he knows." She put the jacket at the corner of her duffel. "He's been making that face at me since I was 14. Eli looked at his hands. They were folded in his lap, resting on the sleeping bag. The lantern put everything in warm yellow, which was less clinical than the headlamp had been, and somehow more exposing. "Wren," he said. "Yeah. What did you mean?" "Earlier, when you said you came this weekend because you wanted to." She looked up at him. Her expression was the most open he'd seen it, not unguarded exactly, but unperformed. No particular angle to it. No management of what he might find there. Just her face. In the lantern light. Considering him. "I mean that Marcus mentioned the trip about 6 weeks ago and I said I probably wasn't coming," she said. "And then I changed my mind." "Why?" "Because you were going." She said it simply. Like it was a fact of moderate importance. Like she was telling him the trail distance or the elevation. "I've been changing my mind about things because you're involved in them for about 8 months now. I figured I should either stop doing that or just do it and see what happened." He held her gaze. He could feel his pulse in his hands. "I don't know what to do with that," he said. "I know. I'm not asking you to do anything with it." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I just stopped wanting to pretend it wasn't true. I'm bad at pretending things aren't true." She looked up again. "You're better at it than me." "I'm really not. You've been pretending to be fine for 3 weeks. That's different." "Is it?" He didn't have a good answer to that. Outside the tent, the campsite had gone quiet, the fire down to coals. Everyone else turned in. The forest was doing its nighttime thing. The particular frequency of frogs and insects and wind that you stopped hearing after a while and only noticed again when it stopped. "I got laid off," he said. I haven't fully let myself say it yet." Out loud. To someone who isn't Marcus. Without immediately saying, "I'm fine," after, "I know. I'm not fine." Wren nodded. Her voice when she spoke was soft but not careful, the difference between gentleness and caution. "What are you?" "I don't know yet." He looked at the tent ceiling. Embarrassed. "Maybe." "Which is stupid." "It's not stupid. 6 years and I didn't see it coming. That feels like something I should have caught." "Restructuring isn't something you catch. It's something that happens to you." She paused. "You know that." "Right. Knowing it and believing it are different." "Yes," she said. "They are." She said it with the weight of someone who'd lived in that gap herself. He looked at her. In the lantern light she looked steady in the way that steadiness is different from stillness. She was present. Attentive. Not performing patience but actually patient. The real kind that costs something. "What did HR say?" she asked. "In the voicemail." He looked at her. "You heard me listening to it. You were outside my tent. The walls aren't that thick." He almost smiled. "They're reaching out because there's a contract position. 6 months. Different team than I was on. Different scope." He paused. "Actually more interesting work than I was doing before. And I haven't called them back." "Why not?" He thought about it. It was a real question. Not a rhetorical one she was asking because she wanted the actual answer. And he'd noticed that about her. The way she asked things and meant them and waited. "Because I'm still mad," he said. "And I don't want to walk back in there while I'm mad." "That's fair." "Or because I'm scared that if I go back it means it's over, the idea that I might do something different. Something actually." He stopped. "Something you actually want," she said. "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "Then what do you want?" "Eli. Actually." He looked at his hands. The lantern put a shadow across his knuckles. He thought about what he'd said at the tree-line times, and whether that had changed in the last 2 hours or if he'd just gotten closer to admitting that it hadn't. "I want to stop pretending I know what I'm doing," he said. "That's a starting point." Wren looked at him. Something in her expression softened at the edges. Not with pity, nothing like pity, but with the particular quality of someone who had just heard the true version of something after a long time of hearing the edited one. "That's a pretty good starting point," she said. He looked at her. The lantern between them was small and steady, and the tent was very quiet. "Wren." 3 sharp raps on the canvas. "Hey." Marcus's voice. Muffled and amused. Lights are on in there. Everything okay?" Eli closed his eyes. He heard Wren press her lips together. He could tell from the small sound she made. Something between a laugh she was suppressing and a sigh she was rerouting. "We're fine, Marcus," she called back. "Cool. A pause. I'm going to bed. Good night." A longer pause. "Good night, Eli." "Good night, Marcus," Eli said, in the flattest possible voice. Footsteps. Retreating. The zip of the neighboring tent. Then silence. Wren turned back to him with an expression of magnificent composure that did not entirely conceal the amusement underneath. "He's the worst," she said. "He really is. He does it because he loves you. That makes it worse." She laughed, a real one this time. Quiet, but unguarded. And it lit up her face in a way that moved through him like something shifting into place. He watched it happen. He watched her watch it happen in his face. And she didn't look away. The lantern was still on. "I'm going to do something," Wren said. Her voice was even and quiet, and her eyes were on his with the kind of steadiness that comes from having made a decision and being at peace with it. "You can stop me if you want." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. Not dramatically. Not with any particular ceremony. Just his hand in hers. Her fingers closing over his knuckles. The same knuckles the lantern had been throwing shadows across. And she held it the way you hold something you've been thinking about holding for a while, carefully but without hesitation, like the decision was already over, and this was just the enacting of it. He didn't stop her. He looked down at their hands. He looked up at her. She was watching him with that open, unperformed expression, not asking anything. Just present, just here. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. It came out lower than he intended. "I know," she said. "That's okay." Outside the tent, the forest was doing its nighttime thing. The lantern was steady and warm. He turned his hand over in hers so their palms were together. And she let him. And neither of them said anything else for a long time. He woke up at 7:03 a.m. and Wren was asleep. That was the difference between this morning and yesterday morning. Yesterday she'd been gone before he surfaced. The sleeping pad smoothed. The granola bar wrapper folded. This morning she was still here. On her side, facing him. One hand loosely curled near her chin. And their hands were no longer holding, but they were close enough that the backs of her fingers were barely touching his wrist where the sleeve of his shirt had ridden up. He lay still for a while. The morning light through the tent was that particular pale gold of early sun through nylon. And outside he could hear a woodpecker working at something, methodical and unbothered. The rest of the camp was quiet. No one else was up yet. He looked at Wren's face. In sleep she looked younger and older at the same time, the particular quality of someone who carries things responsibly while awake and only sets them down when they stop choosing to. Her breathing was even deep. She'd been right. The night before last, she wasn't a chaotic sleeper. She barely moved. He didn't move either. He lay there in the early morning quiet and let himself feel the thing he'd been not feeling for 3 weeks. Which was this: he was scared. And he was tired of being scared. And somewhere in the middle of the last 4 hours the scared part had gotten a little smaller, and the tired of it part had gotten a little bigger. And that felt like a beginning of something. Which was different from knowing what the something was. But different in a direction he could live with. After a while, Wren's eyes opened. She looked at him without startlement. Without the performed confusion some people do when they wake up somewhere unexpected. She just looked at him. And her expression was the same open, unperformed thing it had been last night when she'd reached for his hand, like she'd already made peace with whatever she might find in his face. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She looked at the tent ceiling, then back at him. "You let me sleep. You were sleeping. You've been awake for a while." "Probably." She turned her head back toward the ceiling and was quiet for a moment. And he watched her do what she'd been doing all weekend, taking in information. Processing it honestly. Not performing a reaction she didn't feel. "How are you?" she asked. She said it the way she asked things, meaning the actual question, not the social version of it. He thought about it. He gave it the consideration it deserved, which was more than he'd been giving it lately. "Better," he said, "than yesterday." She turned her head to look at him. Something in her expression settled, like a weight shifting to a better position. "Good," she said. They lay there in the early gold light for another few minutes without talking. And it wasn't the stiff, self-conscious quiet of the first night, two people maintaining careful distance in the dark. It was different. It was the quiet of two people who had said the true things and were now sitting on the other side of them, seeing what was there. At Shopte dos Chipatru. Eli sat up. "Coffee," he said. "That's the most complete sentence you've said all morning," Wren said, also sitting up. "It's a complete sentence. It's a noun. A very important noun." She pulled her jacket on, and he unzipped the tent door. And they both climbed out into the cool mountain morning, and the campsite was still quiet except for the woodpecker and the distant sound of the lake. The fire pit had coals from last night, and it took him 5 minutes to get it going again, and another 10 to get the camp stove heated. And Wren pressed the French press with the quiet competence of someone who had done this before, and the smell of coffee moved through the cool air like a small announcement that the day had officially started. She handed him a cup. 2 sugars. No milk. He took it. Their fingers touched this time, and neither of them moved away from it. They were sitting on opposite sides of the fire pit, hands around their cups. When Marcus came out of his tent, he stopped in the entrance and looked at them. Specifically, he looked at the fact that they were both there, both with coffee, both at a perfectly normal and unremarkable distance. But in the way of two people who had decided something, and Marcus, who had known Eli for 11 years, and Wren for her entire life, read the room in approximately 4 seconds. He leaned against the tent pole. He looked at Wren. He looked at Eli. He looked back at Wren. "Took you guys long enough," he said. Wren didn't look up from her coffee. "Good morning." "Marcus. I'm serious. I've been watching this happen in slow motion since February." He walked over and poured himself a cup from the French press that Wren had considerately left with the plunger up. "February," he repeated. "To no one in particular. The housewarming party. You spent 45 minutes talking about the same book in a corner and then both pretended afterward that it hadn't happened." "We were talking about a book," Eli said. "You were absolutely not just talking about a book." Marcus sat down in the camp chair between them with the settled authority of someone whose theory has just been confirmed. "I kept waiting for one of you to do something about it, and neither of you did anything about it for 8 months. 6, Wren said. "February to August is 6 months, Eli said, mildly. Marcus looked at them. Are you correcting my math together already?" "Your math was wrong," Wren said. "You're going to be insufferable," Marcus said. He sounded delighted about it. He took a long sip of his coffee. "Just so you know, both of you, together, insufferable." He pointed at Wren. I knew in April. You came to Mom's birthday dinner and you spent the whole drive home talking about this guy." Wren turned her coffee cup in her hands. "What did I say?" "You said he was a good listener and he knew how to be quiet, and those are apparently extremely rare qualities." Marcus shook his head. "I told you to just call him and you said, I said I didn't want to make things weird. And instead you waited 6 months and shared a tent in the rain. That was the tent collapsing. Wren, I saw the weather forecast 3 days before this trip." A pause. "I put you in the tent that was going to collapse." Silence. Eli looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him with an expression of complete and cheerful composure. "You borrowed a bad tent," Eli said slowly. "I suggested she borrow her cousin's tent." "Yes, her cousin's bad tent. Her cousin's tent that was, yes, not in great condition and probably not going to survive a significant rain event." Marcus drank his coffee. "In my defense, I didn't make it rain." "Marcus," Wren's voice was the particular tone of someone who was genuinely trying to be exasperated and was losing the fight with it. "You engineered this." "I facilitated," Marcus said. "There's a difference. And you're welcome." He stood up, stretching, with the unhurried ease of a man who'd slept well and had no regrets. "Also, Eli I've known since April too. You asked me twice what she was up to. You hate asking people what they're up to." He went back into his tent to get his toiletry bag, leaving them sitting across the fire pit from each other. Eli looked at Wren. Wren looked at Eli. The fire was going steadily now, small and orange in the morning air. "He's the worst," she said. "You said that last night. It remains true." She was smiling. "Though, the real one, the one that went up on one side first, the one he'd been noticing for 2 days. Are you mad?" He thought about it. He thought about the bad tent and the rain and lying on his back at 11 p.m. listening to someone knock on his canvas wall, and the bridge over the creek, and the tree line, and her hand in the dark. "No," he said. He meant it. "Good." She finished her coffee. The North Trail had a connecting loop. "If we start by 9, we could do the whole thing." He looked at her. "You want to hike?" "I want to hike with you," she said. Just that. Plainly, without embellishment. "We can talk, or not talk. Either is fine." He stood up. "I need to eat something first. There are granola bars." "I'm not eating a granola bar. I'm making eggs." She looked at him for a second. Something in her expression did the thing he'd noticed yesterday, the settling, the shifting of weight, something coming to rest. "Okay," she said. "I'll help." The loop trail connected to the North Trail at the 2-mile mark and added another 4 miles around the back of the ridge, which brought the total to 10 miles and a full morning. And they did all of it. Priya and Jess decided to stay at camp. Dev was fishing again. Marcus said he'd come, but turned back at the first mile, claiming his knee was bothering him, which was a lie of such transparent construction that neither of them acknowledged it. They went alone. The back half of the loop climbed to a ridge that wasn't marked on most maps, a narrow, rocky spine maybe 50 feet wide at the crest, with a view that opened in both directions at once, east and west, the valley falling away on both sides and the sky enormous above it. They stood there for a long time without talking. Eli looked at the valley to the west, already deep in shadow from the angle of the sun. He thought about the voicemail. He thought about 6 years and the word times, restructuring times, and the way his hands had been sitting in his lap for 3 weeks. Not fixing anything. "I'm going to call them back," he said. HR. Wren was looking at the eastern valley, where the light was still full and gold. "Okay," she said. "Not because I want to go back, but because I want to make the decision, not just avoid it." "That's different," she said. "Yeah." He looked at his hands. "I also want to look at what else is there. What else I could do. I've been not looking because I don't know. Because looking means I have to know what I want. And not knowing felt safer." Wren turned to look at him. Her hair was moving in the wind off the ridge, the loose piece near her temple crossing her face, and she pushed it back without thinking about it. A gesture so automatic it was almost invisible. "What do you want?" she asked. Just that. The same question she'd asked him last night at the tree line and again in the tent. The question she'd kept asking him with the patience of someone who understood that some answers need more than one invitation. He looked at the valley. He looked at her. He reached out and tucked the piece of hair back from her face carefully, with 2 fingers, and her breath changed slightly. The quality of her attention narrowing to the single point of contact, he left his hand where it was, at the side of her face, and she didn't move away from it. "I'm working on that," he said. "I think I'm getting closer." She looked at him. Her eyes were steady and dark and warm in the way that warmth is different from easy-earned warmth, the kind that costs something and is worth it. She turned her face very slightly into his hand. "Take your time," she said. He did. He stood there at the top of the ridge with his hand at the side of her face and the valley falling away in both directions, and the sky enormous above them. And he let himself be in the middle of it, the not yet knowing, the beginning of something, the particular quality of standing at the edge of a decision that hasn't been made yet, and finding that the view from there is better than he'd expected. She stepped closer. He let her. The wind came off the ridge and moved her hair again, and he held it back for her. And she looked up at him, and the look was the same as her hand in the tent had been, a decision already made. No performance. Just the thing itself. He leaned down and kissed her. It was quiet. It lasted a while. When they pulled apart, she was still looking at him with that open, unperformed expression, and the corner of her mouth was up on the one side. "Your friend set this whole thing up," she said. "I know. I'm choosing not to tell him it worked. He already knows. I know that too." She turned back toward the trail. "Come on. We need to get back before Marcus texts me 12 times asking how the hike went." He fell into step beside her. "How many has he sent already?" She pulled out her phone and showed him. The screen had 6 unread messages from Marcus, the most recent of which was a single emoji. Eli took the phone and typed back times, 0 out of 10. "Mind your business." He handed it back to her. She looked at the screen and laughed. The real one. Unguarded. The one that went all the way up and sent it. They hiked back through the afternoon light, and he talked about the contract position, and she asked questions. Real ones. The kind that pushed back and required actual thought. And he found himself thinking about things he hadn't let himself think, about what he'd actually liked about the work, what he'd been tolerating, what the difference felt like. She talked about the arts organization in Portland, the one she hadn't taken, and what she'd do differently now. And he asked the same questions back at her, and she answered honestly, the way she always did. At the bridge over the creek, they stopped again. The creek was lower today. The rain gone. The water slower and clearer. He put his arms on the railing and she stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders were touching. "You know," she said, looking at the water, "Marcus is going to tell this story at every holiday for the next decade. The tent story. The tent story. The bad weather forecast. The engineered tent collapse, all of it. It's going to become legend. We don't have to give him details. He doesn't need details. He already has a narrative. He'll embroider it." She paused. "It'll be extremely annoying." "Yeah," Eli said. "Worth it. Though," she said, quietly. He looked at her. She was still watching the creek. Her arms on the railing, the late afternoon light coming through the canopy at an angle that caught the edge of her profile and held it. "Yeah," he said. "Worth it." Below them, the creek moved over its rocks, doing what it had been doing, finding its way around obstacles without drama. Just direction. Just steady forward motion in the direction it had decided to go. They made it back to camp at 4:30 with 2 hours of light left. And Marcus was sitting in his camp chair doing absolutely nothing, which was a dead giveaway that he'd been watching the trailhead for the last 20 minutes. He looked up when they came in. He looked at them. He looked back down at whatever he was pretending to read. "Good hike?" he asked. "Great hike," Wren said. "Views okay?" "Excellent views." "Good." He turned a page. "Eli, you good?" Eli sat down in the chair next to him. He put his water bottle down. He thought about the voicemail, and the contract position, and the view from the top of the ridge, and Wren's hand in his in the lantern light, and the particular quality of beginning something without knowing exactly where it goes. "Yeah," he said. Marcus nodded. He didn't say anything else. That was the thing about 11 years, sometimes you didn't have to. Love isn't the moment you finally say the right thing. It's the moment you stop trying to say the fine thing instead and someone is still there. Waiting. Holding the space you forgot to take up for yourself. So here's the question. When did you last let someone actually wait, not as a test, but as a gift? And when did you last let yourself be worth waiting for,